The skies of Niveria, once a tapestry of shimmering auroras and peaceful twilight, had become a battlefield. Streaks of fire and plasma rained down upon the capital as enemy warships broke through the planet's final defensive shields. The once impenetrable Navari Empire was crumbling under the relentless assault of the Sarnathian ancient race hellbent on annihilation. Their ships, jagged and monstrous, sliced through the clouds like predators hunting prey. Princess Ilera, heir to the Navari throne, stood at the massive window of the imperial palace, her violet eyes scanning the chaotic horizon. Her heart sank as another royal cruiser was torn apart in a brilliant explosion, its pieces scattering like ashes across the once beautiful landscape. The great crystal citadel, which floated above the capital city, cracked and began its descent. The screams of her people filled her mind, but she had no time to grieve. The throne room was a stark contrast to the grand space it once was. The walls, once gleaming with intricate carvings of her ancestors, were now marred by blaster fire and debris. Holographic maps flickered with static, showing the advancing Sarnathi forces tearing through the planet's defenses. In the center of the room, her mother's throne empty and cold served as a reminder of the Empire's rapid collapse. The Empress had died in battle just hours earlier, leading the last fleet in a futile attempt to protect the Empire. Ilera clutched her daughter, Lixis, tightly against her chest. The little girl, just 5 years old, had been rushed from the royal nursery by her bodyguards moments before the Sarnathi reached the palace gates. Her small hands clung to Ilera's cloak, her face buried against her mother's chest, oblivious to the danger around her. Ilera turned to the few remaining loyal guards who still stood in the throne room, their faces grim and weary. General Thaler, the last of her elite protectors, approached, his armor dented and his face smeared with blood. He gave a slight bow, though it was clear he was exhausted from the fighting. "Your Highness," he said, his voice hoarse. "The palace defenses won't hold much longer. The Sarnathi have breached the outer walls. We must evaluate now." "Evaluate where?" Ilera asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to remain calm. "There's nowhere left to run." Thaler hesitated before speaking. "There's one option. The Astralice. It's still functional, though barely. It can take you far from here away from the Empire." Ilera's heart sank. The Astralice was a last resort vessel, a small craft equipped with stealth technology, designed for escape rather than combat. It was capable of long-range jumps to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, places even the Navari hadn't fully explored. But using it meant abandoning her people, her empire. Everything she had known. What of the others? The council, the citizens? What will become of them, she asked, knowing the answer but needing to hear it. Thaler lowered his head. "Most of the council is dead, Your Highness. Those who survived have already fled or surrendered. The people. They are doing what they can to survive, but we cannot stop the Sarnathi. The only hope for our future is you and Princess Lixis." Ilera closed her eyes, her thoughts racing. She had been trained her entire life to lead her people, to protect them in times of crisis. But now, with the Empire falling, her role had changed. Her duty was no longer to the throne, it was to her daughter, and to the survival of their bloodline. She knelt down and looked at Lixis, who blinked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. The child didn't fully understand what was happening, though she could sense the tension and fear in the air. "Lixis," Ilera whispered, stroking her daughter's silver hair. "We're going on a journey, my star. We're going somewhere far away. But you must be brave, like the queens of old. Can you do that?" Lixis nodded, though she didn't speak. Her small hand reached up to touch the pendant hanging from Ilera's neck, a family heirloom that symbolized their royal lineage. Ilera kissed the child's forehead and stood, her resolve hardening. "We will go to the Astralice," Ilera said, turning to Thaler. "Prepare the ship. I will ensure Lixis and I survive. Whatever it takes." Thaler saluted and turned to gather his men, who moved quickly to escort the princess and her daughter to the escape ship. Elara followed, but as she walked through the palace halls, her mind was racing. Navari culture was built on alliances, often through marriage or concubinage. When one empire fell, survival sometimes meant seeking refuge under the protection of another, even if it meant offering oneself as a concubine to a powerful ruler. It was an ancient tradition, often frowned upon in modern times, but it was rooted in the preservation of bloodlines and royal duty. As they reached the hidden hangar where the Astralise waited, Elara began to consider her options. The universe was vast, filled with dangerous factions and untrustworthy leaders. There was one planet, however, that had always intrigued her Earth. The Navari had observed humans from afar for centuries, never intervening, but they knew of the species' potential. Humans were a resilient, resourceful race, capable of great destruction but also great kindness. They were ungoverned by the cosmic alliances of the galaxy, existing on the fringes of interstellar politics. In their isolation, they had developed a fierce independence. Perhaps, Elara thought, Earth could offer the protection she needed. But she wouldn't arrive as a queen. She would have to hide her true identity, her past, and her power. She would need a human, someone strong enough to defend her, yet unaware of the cosmic war she had fled. She thought again of concubinage, a means of survival in exchange for loyalty and protection. It was a practice that had preserved countless royal lines in the past. If it meant ensuring Lixus's safety, she would offer herself to a human man, not as a queen or warrior, but as a concubine, someone willing to pledge loyalty in exchange for sanctuary. The idea filled her with dread, but she had no choice. Desperation was a powerful motivator. As the Astralise hummed to life, Elara took one last look at her home. The skies above Niveria were aflame, the palace crumbling in the distance. Her people were gone, her empire shattered. "Forgive me," she whispered to the ghosts of her ancestors. Then, with Lixus at her side, she stepped onto the ship. The door sealed behind them, and the Astralise lifted into the heavens, bound for the only place left in the universe where hope remained, Earth. In this revised and expanded chapter, we see the desperation and the emotional weight of the Navari Empire's collapse and Elara's impossible choices. We also further explore her internal struggle and decision to seek refuge on Earth, offering a greater sense of stakes and urgency. Sam Mathis had long since embraced the quiet solitude of his life in the Pacific Northwest. Once a decorated soldier, he now lived in self-imposed exile, far away from the world he had fought to protect. The cabin he called home was modest, perched on the edge of an old forest, where only the howls of the wind and the occasional rustle of wildlife interrupted the silence. Isolation had become Sam's only comfort. His days were simple: chopping wood, hunting, repairing what was broken around the cabin. The world had moved on, but Sam couldn't. The war he had fought in had taken more than just physical scars. It had taken his purpose, his family, and left him with nothing but memories he would rather forget. On this night, like many others, Sam sat on his porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the stars glitter overhead. It was a crisp, clear evening, and for a moment he allowed himself to feel a small sliver of peace. But that tranquility was short-lived. Out of nowhere, the sky above him lit up in a bright flash. At first, Sam thought it was a shooting star, but the object moved too quickly, too deliberately. Its trajectory wasn't natural. It streaked across the sky, glowing with an eerie silver light, before disappearing beyond the tree line with a low, rumbling crash. Sam's military instincts kicked in before he even realized it. His glass hit the floor, forgotten, as he bolted into action. Grabbing his rifle and flashlight, he moved swiftly, his heart racing as he plunged into the dense woods. The night air was cool, and the forest was thick with shadows, but Sam knew these woods better than anyone. As he neared the area where the strange object had disappeared, the scent of burnt metal and scorched earth filled the air. The trees were singed, and branches lay broken and scattered across the forest floor. The closer Sam got, the more unnerving it became. He pushed past a fallen tree and then stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the middle of the clearing, was a spacecraft sleek, otherworldly, its silver surface gleaming faintly under the moonlight. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, and Sam had seen some bizarre things during his time in the military. The ship was small, built for speed and stealth rather than war. Its hull was dented, clearly damaged in the crash, but it was still mostly intact. Sam raised his rifle, scanning the area cautiously, half expecting some sort of alien creature to emerge from the wreckage. As he approached, the side hatch of the ship hissed open with a low, mechanical whine. A wave of warm air escaped from within, carrying with it a faint, almost floral scent. Sam froze, his grip tightening on his rifle. From the darkness inside the ship, a figure stepped out. At first, Sam couldn't believe what he was seeing. The figure was a woman tall, statuesque, with long, flowing silver hair that shimmered like starlight. Her skin was pale, with a slight iridescent glow, and her eyes. Her eyes were a brilliant violet, unlike anything human. In her arms, she carried a small child, a girl no older than 5 or 6. The child's eyes were closed, her head resting on the woman's shoulder, as if she were asleep. The woman's face was a mask of exhaustion and desperation, yet there was a regal air about her, something commanding and otherworldly. Sam's mind raced. Was this real? Had he finally lost it after years of isolation, or had he stumbled upon something no human had ever seen? The woman took a step forward, her movements slow and cautious, as though unsure of how he might react. She stopped a few feet away from him, her violet eyes locking with his, pleading. "Please," she said, her voice soft but clear, though thick with an accent unlike any Sam had ever heard. "I need your help." Her words snapped Sam out of his shock, but he kept his rifle raised, unsure of what to make of the situation. "Who? What are you?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. The woman hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking toward the child in her arms. "My name is Ilera," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I am from a world far from here. We are refugees, fleeing from those who would see us destroyed." Sam frowned, his mind struggling to keep up with what she was saying. This was crazy. He had seen strange things during his time in the military classified tech, secret projects, but this? A crashed alien ship, an extraterrestrial woman and child asking for his help? It was beyond anything he could comprehend. Still, something in her eyes made him lower his rifle, though he didn't let go of it completely. "What do you want from me?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Ilera's expression softened, and she took another step closer, her voice quiet, but urgent. "Protection," she said, almost pleading. "I have no one else to turn to. My daughter and we need sanctuary." Sam stared at her, his mind still reeling. Protection? Sanctuary? He was just one man living alone in the woods. What could he possibly do to help her? But before he could say anything, Ilera continued, her tone becoming more desperate. "Take me as your concubine," she begged, her words coming out in a rush. "In my culture, it is a bond of loyalty. I will serve you, offer you my power. In return, you must protect us." Sam blinked, taken aback by her words. Concubine? Was this some kind of alien custom? The idea was so absurd, so far removed from anything he could have expected, but the desperation in her voice made it clear that she wasn't joking. He looked at the child, still sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. Ilera's gaze followed his, and her face softened with a mix of fear and love as she looked at her daughter. "Please," Ilera whispered. "I would not ask this if there were any other way. But my enemies will come for us, and if they find us, they will kill her." Sam's gut twisted. He didn't know anything about alien politics or what kind of danger this woman and her child were in, but he knew one thing for certain: she was terrified, and whatever was after her was real enough to make her risk everything. His eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, something shifted. He didn't fully understand what she was asking, but he knew what it meant to be responsible for someone else's life. He had failed before on the battlefield, in his personal life, but maybe this time would be different. Sam lowered his rifle completely, exhaling a long, slow breath. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "You can stay here. I'll help you." Illyra let out a sigh of relief, though her eyes were still filled with uncertainty. She dipped her head in a gesture of gratitude, her silver hair falling like a curtain around her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." Sam nodded, still trying to process everything. He stepped aside, gesturing toward his cabin. "Come on," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "It's not much, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Illyra nodded, her body sagging slightly with exhaustion. She adjusted her grip on her daughter, and together they walked toward the cabin. As they entered, Sam cast one last glance at the strange ship behind them, half expecting something or someone to come bursting out of the forest after them. Nothing moved. But Sam knew one thing for certain: his life had just changed forever. And whatever was coming next, he would be ready for it. The following days were surreal for Sam Mathis. His quiet, lonely life in the woods had been completely upended by the arrival of Illyra and her daughter, Lixis. The two moved through his cabin like ghosts, their presence a constant reminder that his world was no longer as small as it had once been. Illyra had explained little since their arrival. Bits and pieces of her story came out in short, guarded conversations. Sam learned that she was the last surviving member of the Navari royal family, and that her daughter, Lixis, was the key to something far larger than Sam could comprehend. But the details of what exactly they were running from, and who the Sarnathi were, remained hazy. Whenever Sam pressed her, Illyra would tense, her eyes flickering with a haunted look, and he knew better than to push. The child, Lixis, was quiet, almost too quiet for a girl her age. She would sit by the cabin window for hours, gazing at the trees with her large, violet eyes, seemingly lost in thought. Every so often, she would hum a strange melody that Sam couldn't place, a song that sent shivers down his spine. For the most part, Illyra kept to herself, either tending to her daughter or moving silently through the cabin. She was a strange mix of regal and broken, her posture always straight, her movements graceful, but her eyes shadowed with grief and exhaustion. And while her alien beauty was undeniable, Sam couldn't help but notice the strain beneath her poised exterior. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees and cast the forest in an amber glow, Sam sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. Illyra sat across from him, cradling Lixis, who had fallen asleep in her arms. For a long while, they didn't speak, the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of nocturnal animals filling the silence. Finally, Illyra broke the quiet. "You've been kind to us, Sam," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the sounds of the night. "More kind than I had any right to expect." Sam glanced up from his work, his brow furrowing. "I'm not sure kindness has anything to do with it," he muttered. "I just couldn't leave you two out there." "You looked desperate." Illyra's lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded, as though acknowledging an unspoken truth. She adjusted Lixis in her arms, her gaze flickering to the sleeping child. "She's all I have left," Illyra whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The last of my bloodline. If anything happens to her, my people will be lost forever." Sam put down his knife, leaning forward slightly. He could feel the weight of her words, though he still didn't fully understand the scope of what she was saying. "Why are they after you?" he asked. "These Sarnathi. Why do they want you and your daughter so badly?" Illyra hesitated, her gaze distant as though she were replaying memories she'd rather forget. "The Sarnathi and my people have been at war for generations," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "But it wasn't always like that. We were once allies, long before I was born. The Navari were known for our knowledge of energy manipulation, what some might call magic, but it's far more complex than that. The Sarnathi, on the other hand, were a warrior race, strong and brutal. We complemented each other. They protected us, and in return, we offered them our wisdom, our technology. Sam leaned back, listening intently. The firelight flickered across Illyra's face, casting shadows under her eyes. But over time, she continued, the Sarnathi grew greedy. They wanted more power, more control. And they began to fear us, fear what we could do if we ever turned our abilities against them. Eventually, they betrayed us, and the alliance crumbled. Now, they want to wipe us out completely, to erase any trace of Navari from the galaxy. Sam let out a low whistle, shaking his head. So, you're saying they're hunting you because you're the last of your kind? Illyra nodded, her expression grim. If they capture us, they'll have the means to control Navari energy. With that power, they could destroy entire star systems, conquer worlds without resistance. Lixus is the key to it all. Sam frowned. Lixus? How? She's unique, Illyra said, her voice barely a whisper. She was born with abilities that even I don't fully understand yet. The Sarnathi know this, and they'll stop at nothing to get her. Sam rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the weight of Illyra's words settle on his shoulders. It was a lot to take in. He had signed up to protect them, but this was something far beyond what he had expected. You said something about a bond, Sam said after a moment. About becoming my concubine. What did you mean by that? Illyra's gaze dropped to the floor, her cheeks flushing slightly. It's a Navari tradition, she explained. A bond between a protector and the one they guard. It's more than just a physical relationship, it's a union of energy, of power. By offering myself as your concubine, I'm not just asking for shelter. I'm offering you the ability to draw upon my strength, to use my abilities to protect us both. Sam blinked, trying to wrap his head around what she was saying. So, you're saying, if we do this, I'll be able to use your power? Your magic? Illyra nodded. Yes. But it's not without cost. The bond is permanent. Once formed, it can't be broken. Sam sat back, staring into the fire. It was a lot to take in. His life had been so simple just days ago, just him, his cabin, and the quiet isolation of the woods. Now, he was being asked to form some kind of magical bond with an alien princess to protect her and her daughter from a race of cosmic conquerors. I need time to think, he said finally, his voice rough. Illyra nodded, her expression understanding, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes. I understand, she whispered. But Sam, time is something we may not have. That night, Sam couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Illyra's words echoed in his head. The Sarnathi were coming, and if they found Illyra and Lixus here, they wouldn't stop at anything to capture them. Part of him wanted to walk away, to tell Illyra to find someone else, somewhere else. This wasn't his fight. He didn't know anything about alien wars or magical bonds. He was just a man who had lost everything, trying to keep what little peace he had left. But another part of him, a part that he hadn't felt in years, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to do something that mattered again. A chance to protect someone who needed him. He thought of Lixus, her wide violet eyes, and the way she had clung to her mother's cloak. The girl had no idea how much danger she was in, and yet, she seemed so calm, so trusting. Sam had lost his own family in the war, and the guilt of it had never left him. Maybe he could make up for it by helping Illyra and her daughter. As dawn broke, Sam made his decision. The next morning, Sam found Illyra sitting by the window, Lixus still asleep beside her. She looked up as he approached, her expression guarded. I've made up my mind, Sam said, his voice firm. If this bond is the only way to protect you and Lixus, then I'll do it. Illyra's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She stood slowly, her hands trembling just slightly as she reached out to touch his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." Sam nodded, though his heart was pounding. He wasn't sure what he was getting himself into, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let anything happen to Illyra or her daughter. Not while he was around. The bond ritual was simple, yet profound. Illyra explained it to him as best as she could. Navari energy would be shared between them, intertwining their life forces in a way that couldn't be undone. As Illyra placed her hands on his chest, Sam felt a strange warmth spread through him, like a gentle current of electricity humming beneath his skin. The air around them seemed to shimmer for a moment, and Sam's senses sharpened. He could feel Illyra's presence in his mind, like a soft, steady pulse. The connection was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't invasive, but it was undeniably intimate. As the ritual ended, Sam let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He felt different, stronger, more aware. The bond had worked. Illyra stepped back, her expression unreadable, but Sam could see the relief in her eyes. "It is done," she said softly. "We are bonded now." Sam nodded, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle on his shoulders. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The air around the cabin had changed, thickening with tension as if the forest itself knew that danger was approaching. Sam stood at the edge of the woods, staring up at the sky, waiting for anything that might signal the start of the confrontation he knew was inevitable. His hands clenched around the rifle slung over his shoulder, though he had a sinking feeling that bullets wouldn't be enough against what was coming. It had been 3 days since he and Illyra had completed the bonding ritual, and already Sam could feel the effects of it. His senses had sharpened. He could hear every rustle of the trees, every scurrying animal in the underbrush. His body felt stronger, more agile, as if a well of energy had been unlocked inside him. But the most disorienting change had been the connection to Illyra herself. Even now, he could sense her in the cabin behind him, her worry humming at the edge of his mind like a faint echo. Illyra had warned him the Sarnathi would come, and soon. They had followed her across the galaxy, and it was only a matter of time before they tracked her down to this remote corner of Earth. That time, it seemed, was now. The first sign came just before dusk. A strange humming noise filled the air, low and eerie, vibrating through the trees. Sam tensed, gripping his rifle as he scanned the sky. A bright light suddenly appeared on the horizon, growing larger and closer with each passing second. "They're here," Illyra said from behind him. Sam didn't need to turn around to know she had joined him at the tree line, her presence an anchor in the storm of his racing thoughts. Sam narrowed his eyes at the light. "How many?" he asked. Illyra's gaze was distant, her violet eyes glowing faintly as she focused on the energy signatures coming from the approaching ships. "It's a small strike force," she said, her voice tight. "But more will follow. They've likely sent a scout unit first to confirm we're here." "Scouts, huh?" Sam muttered, his grip tightening on the rifle. "Well, let's make sure they don't live long enough to send word back." Illyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "Be careful, Sam. The Sarnathi are not like the enemies you've faced before. They are ruthless, and they have technology far beyond anything on this planet." Sam shrugged, but there was a determination in his eyes. "They bleed like anything else?" Illyra hesitated. "Yes," she finally said. "But killing them will not be easy. You must trust the bond. Use it. Draw on my energy when you need it." Sam exhaled slowly, nodding. He wasn't fully sure how to use the bond. He could feel the connection between them, but the idea of tapping into Illyra's power still felt foreign. And yet, there was no time to second guess. They were outnumbered and outgunned. If they had any chance of surviving this, he would need to figure it out and fast. The light in the sky grew larger, and soon Sam could make out the sleek, angular shapes of the Sarnathi ships. They hovered above the tree-line for a moment, their engines humming ominously, before descending into the forest clearing near the cabin. The ships were dark, almost predatory in design, with sharp, jagged edges and glowing red lights. As they touched down, the air crackled with energy, and a thick, suffocating silence followed. Elara stepped closer to Sam, her face tense but resolute. "They will not show mercy," she said quietly. "We must be prepared for that." Sam nodded, his body tensing in readiness. "I wasn't expecting any." The hatch of the first ship hissed open, and from within, a group of Sarnathi soldiers emerged. They were tall, their dark armor covered in sharp, angular designs that seemed to pulse with energy. Their eyes, glowing a fiery red, locked onto Sam and Elara immediately. In their hands, they carried strange, sleek weapons that hummed with power. Sam swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his chest. He had faced enemies before, terrorists, insurgents, soldiers of all kinds, but these creatures were something else entirely. They moved with a cold, mechanical precision, their gaze unflinching, their intent clear. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to kill. Elara's voice echoed softly in his mind, calm but firm. "Remember, Sam. We are stronger together. Focus on the bond." Sam took a deep breath, feeling the faint pulse of Elara's energy through their connection. It was like a current running just beneath his skin, waiting to be called upon. Slowly, he let himself reach out for it, and as he did, he felt a surge of power ripple through him. His senses sharpened even further, and a strange warmth filled his chest. The Sarnathi soldiers raised their weapons. "Now!" Elara shouted. Sam moved. In an instant, he sprang forward, faster than he had ever moved before. His body felt light, like he was gliding across the ground. He aimed his rifle at the nearest soldier and fired. The bullet hit the Sarnathi's armor, but instead of bouncing off, it punched through with a force Sam hadn't anticipated. The soldier crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Elara was beside him in an instant, her hands glowing with a soft, ethereal light. She raised them, and a shimmering shield formed between them and the advancing Sarnathi, deflecting the blasts from their weapons. Her face was set in concentration, beads of sweat forming at her temples as she maintained the barrier. "Focus on the ones flanking us," she called out. Sam nodded, feeling a strange synchronicity between their movements. He could sense Elara's intentions through the bond, almost as if they were sharing the same thoughts. He swung his rifle to the side, firing at the two soldiers attempting to circle around them. The shots landed true, dropping them before they could get too close. But the Sarnathi kept coming. More soldiers poured from the ships, their red eyes glowing ominously in the fading light. Sam and Elara fought side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing moment. Sam could feel Elara's energy flowing through him, enhancing his strength, his speed, his reflexes. He moved with a precision and confidence that felt almost unnatural, like he was no longer just himself, but something more. But even with the bond, the fight was overwhelming. The Sarnathi were relentless, their weapons far more advanced than anything Sam had ever encountered. The shield Elara had created flickered with each blast, weakening as the fight dragged on. "I can't hold it much longer," Elara gasped, her face pale from the effort. Sam gritted his teeth, looking around for anything that could turn the tide. And then, his eyes landed on one of the Sarnathi ships. "If I can get to that ship," he muttered, more to himself than to Elara, "I might be able to take them down from the inside." Elara's eyes widened. "You'll never make it. There are too many of them." Sam glanced at her, a fierce determination in his eyes. "I'll make it," he said. "But I need you to cover me." Elara hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her face hardening with resolve. "Go. I'll hold them off." Sam didn't waste any time. He sprinted toward the ship, weaving between the trees as blasts of energy sizzled past him. His body moved with a speed and grace he hadn't known he was capable of, the bond pushing him beyond his limits. Ilara, her hands glowing brighter than ever, sent out a wave of energy that knocked several Sarnathi soldiers back, giving Sam the opening he needed. He reached the ship, his heart pounding in his chest, and slammed his hand onto the access panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss, the door slid open. Sam ducked inside, his mind racing as he tried to figure out the controls. The cockpit was alien, the technology far beyond anything he had seen, but somehow it felt familiar. The bond with Ilara pulsed in the back of his mind, guiding his hands as he reached for the controls. Outside, Ilara fought desperately, her energy nearly depleted. She could feel Sam's presence in the ship, and through the bond, she willed her strength into him, helping him navigate the complex system. Finally, Sam found what he was looking for. A control panel lit up, displaying what he assumed was the ship's weapons system. He slammed his hand down on a series of buttons, and a low hum filled the air. Outside, the remaining Sarnathi soldiers paused, their red eyes narrowing in confusion. And then, with a deafening roar, the ship's cannons fired. A barrage of energy blasts rained down on the Sarnathi forces, tearing through their ranks. The soldiers fell one by one, their armor disintegrating under the assault. The remaining ships, realizing they were outgunned, began to retreat, their engines roaring as they lifted off into the sky. Sam stumbled out of the ship, his body trembling with exhaustion, but the sight of the fleeing Sarnathi brought a small, grim smile to his face. They had won. For now. He made his way back to Ilara, who had collapsed on the ground, her face pale and drenched with sweat. She looked up at him weakly, a tired but relieved smile crossing her lips. "You did it," she whispered. Sam knelt beside her, pulling her into his arms. "We did it," he corrected, his voice soft but firm. Ilara closed her eyes, leaning into him as exhaustion overtook her. "This is only the beginning, Sam," she murmured. "They'll come back. Stronger than before." Sam nodded, staring up at the sky where the last of the Sarnathi ships had disappeared. "Let them come," he said quietly, his grip tightening around her. "We'll be ready." For the first time in years, Sam felt a sense of purpose again, a reason to fight, to protect. He wasn't just a man hiding from the world anymore. He was something more, something stronger. And he would stop at nothing to protect Ilara and Lixus from whatever came next.